Hello, I'm James Woodcock from pixelrefresh.com, and here we are for yet another game and gadget podcast. And of course, with me, I have one of the co-founders of Revolution Software. I may say he's my favorite one of the co-founders, but I can't say that in a podcast. I may be biased. Welcome again, Tony Warriner.
Thanks very much.
That's a good intro, Steve. You like that one, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I'm my favourite Revolution co-founder too. So
Quite right, absolutely. And of course, Aaron Fothergill, who's got vast experience in various retro consoles and computers. And in fact, now I've got an Amiga, I want to spend some time playing some of his Amiga classics so we can maybe talk about those in detail in the next podcast once I've played them and gone, wow. But let's go over those later. Welcome again, Aaron, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And okay, so gentlemen, we're going to start with Aaron because he's got an anecdote, and I'm hoping it's not going to stitch me up, but here we go.
So, yeah, I was mentioning in the pre-game chat, as it were, I'm going to add crochet engineer to my CV because here in our little Spanish village, there's a group of ladies have started doing crochet, and they're making quite large crochet sort of things, basically to cover the streets. So last year they made a huge, great big crochet blanket covering thing and hooked it up either side of the street over the front of one of the bars, which gave some shade for the patrons and actually allowed the bar to put extra tables out on the other side of the street and do better over the summer. And it went down well. And this year, they're now apparently planning to do another one of these for one of the plazas up at the hill by one of the churches, and also do a Christmas tree and so on. This is supposedly the plan. And I don't crochet, right? It's a useful skill. I wouldn't mind learning it at some point, but I'm not too worried about learning it immediately. However, the ladies that do crochet don't do engineering, and they have this slight problem that they also don't know how to work out how many granny squares is required for this particular area of coverage of this wall and so on. And how do you fix them to this wall without it blowing away or breaking? End result being, because I've kind of done bits and pieces of this in the past of helping artists with the maths and engineering side for installations and stuff like that. So it's a very similar kind of deal. So essentially what I will do is I will pop up there, measure up a few things, kind of ask a few questions about, well, what size are these granny squares, and
I was going to say,
how are they, how are they built? And having talked to friends of mine who do crochet, learned about things like different weights of yarn and stuff like that. So I can work out a few tolerances and so on. And then actually sit down and work out a plan for them of just exactly what size, how many they need to do, what types of yarns they have to avoid maybe. Because, for instance, apparently wool is twice as heavy as the synthetic yarns, especially if it gets wet and so on. So you have to watch out for that kind of thing. Because the size of this thing, potentially, it could be quite a lot of mass. So if you're fixing it onto an old ancient church wall with the wrong kind of fixings, the whole thing could suddenly get caught by the wind and blown away, or weighted down by water and collapse on people, and so it suddenly becomes quite a fun thing. And I say I get to put crochet engineer on my CV. So,
which does raise the question: where can we see the rest of your CV?
I've a good question actually. I did actually have to print it out. We did a thing a while back about having to do our CV for an investment thingy, I went back, found my old CV, which I haven't used probably since Argonaut days, because I've only ever done one job interview ever.
Wow.
And it just kind of one of these things where I did a job interview, and then the company I was working for got bought by another, and so everyone just kept buying the company I worked at. I just never really got around to doing another job interview. I just went with it.
Went with the flow.
But I then kind of, when you start adding all the games you've done onto the CV, and it's like, you've said this is supposed to be a single page CV for this form, right? Yeah, mine's about 5. So there's an abridged version of it, and then there's the full detailed version of it, and there's a few weird things. But again, it's like the crochet engineer thing. Actually, as I mentioned before we started recording, there's some game design elements to this. In that, if you're designing a game on a particular subject, you do not need to be an expert in that subject. Which is kind of good considering some of the games that have been put out there.
That's a
especially the serial killer
reassuring
ones.
notion, given a lot of games are about murder and intrigue. So you don't have to
Exactly,
be a murderer to write a game about murder. That's good to know. Thank you.
You just have to know enough useful information about it, and how it works is the general thing. The generals about how it works to actually design gameplay. The thing you've got to be good at is designing gameplay, and looking at the elements of what makes this thing interesting, and or not interesting if you're doing something as deliberately complicated simulator or something. But generally speaking, you're looking at what are the key things of this and understanding it in a way that you can present it to other people. So if you dig way too far into crocheting, like for instance, it's not about weaving or anything. It's knotting and all this kind of stuff. There's all sorts of weird things about it, and again, things like the different types of yarn and all this kind of thing. I need to know enough about it for the general worry about weight and stress and stuff like that. I don't need to know all the different things about how it retains color and that. That's their problem.
Well, I bet they've wanted to tell you about that side as well.
Oh, probably. I mean, that is a thing. When you're doing research for a game, you'll find out a lot more stuff than you actually need to know, or even want to know a lot of the time.
I know one thing about crochet. It's easier than knitting.
Yes, apparently. Yeah.
That's it.
We should have ended the podcast on that line. That would have been perfect, wouldn't it? But we've got still plenty of time, Jeff.
Well,
if we've learned anything from the podcast, that is
edit
it.
that bit to the end, then no problem.
I don't do that. I'm too lazy for that.
We could start another one, couldn't we? Just like knitting and stuff.
Yeah.
I'll let you think of what the title will be.
Spinning a yarn.
Spinning a yarn.
Oh, God.
Very good. Very good. Oh, man. We've got to do it just to use the title. Okay.
Do it now.
Otherwise, I feel all right, Nick. Okay, so moving on.
There's a challenge, a crochet game.
Crochet simulator.
Well, not even necessarily a simulator. Work out crochet into a game design. That could be,
It's been done.
That's it.
I can't remember the name of it, but there was
it's not surprising, but yeah.
There is an iPad app where essentially you're building up a picture of something and you're drawing it in with your finger at the wall patterns, and it's almost like a mini puzzle, but it's meant to be relaxing and to de-stress, and it does actually
cozy, as they say these days.
It's definitely cozy, most definitely cozy, and I felt very cozy after playing it for a while. But I'm not sure I was going to explain it to the wife sat next to me when she was staring over, like, "What's he doing?" But regardless, Tony, you have not been to that many recent retro big events. And yet, all of a sudden, you're in numerous. Every time I check, you've been at some big exhibition, and you've been speaking there with Charles Cecil. So you've done 2 that I'm aware of, and then you've got another one soon, which I'm happy to say I will be visiting as well to see you in person for the first time.
It's a slight exaggeration. I mean, I was on a panel at Zap Live in whatever it was, August.
It's being modest.
And then I was at Adventure X. I was at last weekend, also on a panel. So I mean, I made a few piffy comments and got a laugh out of 2 of them, and let other people do the main speaking. So I was very much myself. But it was good. It was. I mean, both of them were very good events. I mean, I don't go to many of these things because it's exhausting, and I like sitting in the dark programming rather than being in the middle of crowds in London and stuff. But talking, my voice is going because I had to talk for 2 days to people, things like that. So it's hard work, but I'll do the really interesting ones, and yeah, there's another one, Crash Live, which is effectively a rerun of Zap Live, in a week's time. So I mean that one's going to be really great, and Charles and I are talking together on a panel question thing, so that should be quite amusing, I think. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
So when you come away from the stage environment and you haven't got somebody coming up to the microphone asking you a question from a distance, what are people coming up to you and asking you when you're sort of off to one side and a retro enthusiast grabs you and go, "Oh, Tony, tell me about this."
It's usually just stuff about Broken Sword and people saying how much they like the games and they how they played them with their families and whatever in the past, and can we sign the game and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's loads of that. I wasn't really expecting it so much at Adventure X because everybody there is developer really. So, I mean, it's a trade show in a way, but the amount of copies of Broken Sword that were brought up to me and Charles to sign was quite surprising, really. And every other person, of course, you speak to is German. That's the other thing.
They really did take point and click adventures to heart, didn't they?
They still take it very seriously. Yeah. Well, today I shipped 5 boxes of books to Germany.
Wow.
Yeah, they're buying them in bulk.
It's kind of you normally would have a traditional book tour and a book signing tour post release of the book, so it's kind of that really, isn't it?
In a way, yeah. No, quite a lot of people have read the book. A few people have said read the book, so yeah.
Fantastic.
It's good. It's a big ego boost, really, for these things,
But what's it make you feel about the community in retro and the enthusiasm for retro? Because we've spoken about this in podcasts for the last few years, where we could tell from online discussions that retro was building, and the coverage on YouTube is insane. There's about several videos a day for a very similar subject. People struggling maybe to find the niche, but what in terms of what you've experienced in person, what's the enthusiasm like?
It's changed a lot. I mean, I said I wasn't expecting much from. I mean, anything would be rubbish, but I didn't know what to expect from Zap, but it was literally euphoria. I mean, we did a panel thing, and I mean, it was a fairly small room. It wasn't that big, but they were queuing out. They were packed in at the back. They were queuing out the door. There was people lined up behind the door, back out into the reception area of this hotel. So they've rejigged it for the next one, for the Crash one, so that it's in a bigger room. And it was just total enthusiasm. It took me back, really. I wasn't surprising it, but that's something that's grown. I think that's really taking off. More recently. I mean, it wasn't like that 5 years ago at all. I mean, I went to Adventure X. I went in 2019. It was a much smaller event. I mean, it was okay, but it was a bit, like the adventure genre. It was a little bit maybe down at heel. But this other one, that last weekend in Greenwich University, I mean, it was much bigger, much more enthusiastic, a lot more going on. A huge lecture hall that filled up with every talk. So. A world of difference. So, I mean, that, as retro itself, as defined as 16 and 8-bit stuff, it appears to be growing in strength. The amount of people writing new content for it, feeding into it is really quite surprising. And, adventure, we shouldn't really call it retro. It's a genre that fell on very hard times, but appears to be alive and kicking and growing again. So, I mean, it's just all good, really good.
No, definitely. All hail the retro enthusiasts for keeping this hobby alive.
Yeah.
I mean, this.
But but you'll see it if you're going to Crash. You'll see it for yourself in 2 weeks. I think you'll be surprised as well.
No, I'm really looking forward to it. I've been to events where there's just lots of computers and arcade machines to sort of try out, and you can see there's lots of people, parents taking the kids and letting them experience some of the devices maybe for the first time. That's nice to see the new generation experiencing that. But in terms of what you saw at that event, what was the age range? Was it lots of middle-aged men like us, or was it a nice bit of a mix?
At Zap, it was. To be fair, it was quite a lot of guys like us. and then a mix. It was mostly guys like us in a mix. Adventure X was all sorts of people, mostly much younger. I was probably one of the oldest people there, to be honest. It was. I mean, the developers were mostly much younger. They were probably people who may even have been born after a game like Beneath a Steel Sky or something. So a lot of them were very young. And others played these games as kids and then have grown into the scene as a developer. So they're much younger and more diverse at Adventure X.
I mean, one of the nice things about point and click adventures is that the technical side of it is, I'd say, relatively simple, but it's more complicated than it looks. It's always the thing. But if you're you're having a proper first stab at writing a serious game, then it's actually not a bad genre to have a go at. So it's a good interest for younger people to try.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, what's hard about adventures is just finishing them and not letting them get too big, because it's very painstaking putting them together. I mean, the problem with adventures is, as we found when we were actually making big commercial ones, was that unlike I don't know, imagine Doom. Okay, once you programmed the stuff, then all you need to do is rearrange the stuff for 20 different levels, and you've got a game. There's nothing to rearrange. Broken Sword, there's nothing to rearrange. It's effectively 80 games lined up against each other. So that's what makes them difficult to finish. But there's a lot of people doing these days. It's viable to do like a 10-screen tiny adventure game, and sell it for a tenner. And as long as it's a great story, then you've got a viable product. So you don't have to do the epic great things that we used to do. You can do a much smaller one. So it's a very viable genre to go into now. And a nice little programming exercise for sure.
And how's your shmup coming along?
My shmup.
Your shmup.
My shmup I was doing years ago and gave up on because Unity just sucked the life out of me. And I'm doing a Metroidvania / adventure now, Wormhole Dungeon. It's more of it's half adventure, half Metroid, so it's a different thing. But that's
Wasn't
going well.
your shmup something that was something else to start with, and then it turned into a shmup?
The shmup was really it was going to be a proper one. I mean, it's half done, but Unity, I just got sick of fighting Unity.
That's a shame.
This one's going to work. There'll be a demo in a couple of months, so it's much more me.
So if it's not done in Unity, then what's your new one going to be using?
Well, it's written in Lua, and it's currently sat on Love 2D engine. But being Lua, it can go anywhere really. The Lua runtime will run on a million different platforms, so it is very portable. We could easily rewrite the shell underneath it, so it's very flexible. And Lua, Lua is it's a really nice little language. I've never made progress as quickly as I can programming in Lua. So everything's good for me now, and I'm getting where I want to be.
Now, for someone who's been coding in machine language, surely anything modern now is going to be, that's quite a bit easier.
Well,
or is it not as straightforward as that?
It's not really. It's all about how you work and the speed that you can work and what the materials are that you've given to work. I don't like these big engines. They're too slow and cumbersome in general for me. I like something tight with a minimal functionality that you can iterate really, really quickly. I mean, on Spectrum, we used to go press a button, test, and I used to be like multiple times, maybe a dozen times. I could run a game a dozen times a minute, testing, tweaking little tiny things. And I can do that now with this. Even with Unity, on a M1 Mac, with tons of memory, you'd type something, switch to Unity to run it, and it like starts churning around, thinking about reassembling.
One of the annoying things Unity seems to have done recently is switched everything to being online, so it's caching so much stuff through servers, and it has to go and reload that every time you go backwards and forwards between Unity and your code editor.
Yeah, that sounds even worse. Yeah.
And
I can't work that way.
No, it's annoying. It's like a lot of the tools nowadays for programming are visual editors and so on, and a lot of stuff is very,
Yeah.
very good if you're a new coder learning how to put things together. So a visual editor, especially if you're a junior coder or if you're a designer who doesn't really want to have to learn to code fully, just again, it's back to the game design thing. You just need to understand it. You need to understand how it works generally, so that you don't make stupid errors. And the visual editors are great for that if you're not a coder. But if you're a coder, you want to be able to type some text in and test it. You don't want to be manipulating things on screen. I mean, again, it's that whole Tom Cruise Minority Report thing is very, very cool for visuals. But you try typing something in on that, it's not.
Yeah. To me, it's not real work. So I understand that that's how it's done in the modern world. But although I don't think these engines, any of them, the current ones, are going to last much longer. I mean, maybe
But
Unreal has
Unity
got
does
some
seem
future.
to be trying to make everyone hate it.
Unity is basically imploding. I mean, its commercial model is unsustainable, and the fact that it's IPO'd, as we said at the time, it's unsustainable. It can never generate enough money for the mob on Wall Street. So I think now it will decline and get bought by someone else. And the question is, what happens when it's bought by someone else? Will it be a Microsoft, which is what most of us would hoping it would be in the first place, who can put it in a safe place within the huge Microsoft empire, and it's not got too much pressure on it to generate a profit in itself. It'll support things like the Xbox and things like C#.
How times have changed, eh?
That would be, rooting for Microsoft. Who would have thought? But that would be, in terms of Unity, that would be probably the only workable solution for it in the long run. As a PLC, as it were, it's got no chance whatsoever. And so I see a big decline and an exodus for Unity until it collapses enough to be bought up by someone else. And after that, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people are leaving it now anyway. I mean, I don't blame them really, because it's, from a corporate point of view, it's run by a bunch of crooks, So we'll see. That's my view. But I said, mark my words. If they IPO, it'll all turn into a nightmare. And people were like, "What are you talking about?" But there's no way you can earn enough money as an engine.
The investment from, I can't remember what they're called now, the company that kind of pushed them, that bought them and pushed them towards everything being free to play and advertising based. And if you're not writing a game that is monetized through that sort of system, you're crazy as far as Rich Jello is concerned. And it's like, no, that's not the point of it. That itself. I mean, I remember a talk by a game developer called Dave Vout, who did a talk way back at a Tiger thing in Guildford, and he, in the early days of free to play and with advertising in games, especially on mobile games, he said it's a pyramid scheme, because the advertising in games is for other games.
Mostly, yeah.
And those games need to advertise to make sure they get enough downloads for the adverts in those games, which are for other games, to make enough money to pay for the adverts that they've paid to get those games downloaded. And basically, to get your game, you basically got to get you've got to spend $1 million to make $1.001 million in advertising.
That's Candy Crush.
And down at the bottom of the pyramid, there's all these little games that are desperately advertising the games above them and not making any money.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. That's exactly what it is. I mean, Candy Crush sits at the top of that pyramid pretty much. And they literally, as you say, they are spending, I read this, they're spending $1 million a day to earn $1.001 million. It's true. Sounds crazy, but
if it sustains, I mean, as long as you can throw money at it and make more money back, it's an investment.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the pyramid collapses because it's not viable for everybody else to support it.
Yeah. And the fact that a lot of these games are using Unity is a problem, isn't it?
I mean, and this is why the people who basically threw all the money into Unity after it IPO'd, this company basically pushed them towards this whole, advertising-based system and free-to-play sort of system. as the primary goal of what Unity should be used for, and then everything else has just kind of gone by the wayside, which of course has caused issues.
Yeah. I mean, it was never a great engine for that anyway. I mean, it abstracted away all the Android nightmares, but it's as a 2D engine, it's way overweight. And most of these games are too. Well, a lot of them are 2D.
I think the reason I went for Unity when I did was because at the time of the two big engines, that and the Unreal Engine, it was the most lightweight, relatively speaking, for mobile.
Yes.
It was Unreal was just utterly crazy for mobile. It was just totally impractical.
Probably still is. I don't know.
It is kind of, but the problem is mobile's got faster and faster and faster. So there's the whole lazy coding kind of thing again, like has happened with everything else. Windows hasn't got faster; it's got lots and lots and lots slower because PCs have got faster. So they can just do quite sloppy code now. That might look nice, but it's a lot slower than it should be.
Yeah. It's just layers and layers and layers and layers is Windows now.
Yeah.
To their credit, Apple Apple don't seem to fall into that problem. It's pretty snappy and light.
Yeah.
Mac OS.
They do to a degree, but every now and again they've had for this software update, all we're going to do is optimize. They do seem to have it every couple of years or so. Apple will go, right, let's have a look and see where we can get rid of some of the crud.
It kind of does a Tetris thing, doesn't it? And
yeah, that's such a good analogy. Yeah,
they had a few rough years. It was probably actually around when they said we're going to get rid of skeuomorphism. And I remember just before that, Apple released this most awesome podcast app, and it was skeuomorphism in the most beautiful sense, where it was like a tape recorder. And when you press play to play the podcast, you could see like the tape working its way around the mechanism. And if you press pause, it would like bounce a little, like it was it was just beautiful. And then they went to this most boring digital only interface. Now, look, it makes for optimization, for speed.
Not even for that.
But it was just like, it was this most beautiful. I dread to think how many hours they spent getting that little bounce right in timing and everything just for pressing pause. It's like we lost a bit of beauty there. But also around that time, this is my true point. I was having a bit of a moan there. The true point was they changed all the icons and it went very graphical in terms of they made a lot of graphical design changes, but the actual underlying OS seemed to suffer and become almost like a second citizen.
Yeah.
So in subsequent years, they did then start thinking, oh, actually, we could just do with here's a year of optimization, and then here's some new features, and then up to exactly like you say.
One of the things they did at that time when they got rid of skeuomorphism was they made a lot more of the UI transparent, and suddenly you've got a lot of alpha fill going on the screen. So that's much more expensive to do because not only are you drawing the thing on top, but you're still having to draw the thing underneath first.
How very Windows Vista.
And there's I remember reading an article not long after they did that where they said, "Oh, Apple's hit the transparent stage." And every OS goes through this stage where suddenly it goes partially transparent and everything goes really bad. And all the design goes bad because they're not really thinking about usability as such. And skeuomorphism is great. I can see why they wanted to change from it. As someone who understands all the things that work, I mean, Apple Books was so nice because you could flip the pages and stuff like that, But it's that joke about, I like, when you give someone a 3.5, some current generation kid a 3.5 inch floppy disk, and they say, "Oh wow, you 3D printed the save icon." It's that because skeuomorphism relies on us understanding and remembering what the thing is that we're simulating.
Wasn't it
real tape and stuff?
Wasn't it Steve Jobs that liked the skeuomorphism? And
Johnny Ive hated it. Johnny Ive hated it. Yeah. And
so when Steve died, it was like Johnny was like, "Oh, it's really bad that Steve's dead, but hey, flat colours now."
Yeah,
it's Johnny.
Yeah, and that caused. I think that was one of the reasons that caused all the rifts inside Apple with the design team. And Johnny Ive left later on eventually from that, you know.
I was very hardcore in all his stuff. I mean, he kind of needed to be reined in. When the laptops had no ports on them, it was like that was like Johnny going, the ports spoil it. Well, actually, they're there for a reason, Johnny. I think we're going to have to sacrifice form for some function now.
Yeah, well, that would be probably the 2015 MacBook Pro, when for a number of years it was like, what are you doing?
Terrible machine.
I mean, I've still got my 2013 MacBook Pro, and it still runs really well even today. And it's still, after 10 years, it's still my main workhorse as a computer. I don't run that much taxing on it, so it works out very well. But then that one came along. Was it the butterfly keyboard?
Oh, yes.
Where if you got a crumb in it, well, that'd be that key gone. You're not using that again, sir. And then you take it to the Apple store and they'd say, oh, yeah, you got to replace the keyboard or something daft. And then, like you're saying, Tony, they got rid of ports, HDMI, gone. Have a dongle for that instead.
Yeah, have a dongle.
Yeah, for photographers,
touch bar as well. We don't need keys. Let's have a touch bar.
Which they've killed.
The weird thing is like Apple's kind of gone away from that and into just about a reasonable level of sensible on things. Yeah. Apart from the mouse, because the mouse is still a Johnny Ive design that's stayed. So you've still got the lightning connector underneath it, which means you've got to flip it on its back to charge it.
Yeah.
I suspect they will replace that very soon. But the weird thing is while Apple's kind of gone back to, we need people use these particular ports and these things, and we need enough of these for people to use them. The EU has suddenly come along and said, no, everything's got to be USB-C. And that's suddenly thrown. And it's like, I can see the excuse for why you want everything to be USB-C, but I can't see the actual practicality of it, because all these people who've got phones with Lightning on have to change their phones. Everyone they're supposed to be stopping people having multiple chargers for different things, but you don't. You have the same charger, just a different lead. And that lead is that lead for a particular reason, usually. And that lead ultimately ends up with a USB-A connector at the base end anyway. So if you make everything USB-C, you've got to buy a new charger that's got a USB-C port on it.
Yeah, I guess the dream is we'll all be using USB-C at some point.
By that time, though, USB-D will come along, and all of a sudden, no one's allowed to use this better connection technology because it's mandated by law that you must use USB-C. And this was one of the other arguments for not allowing this law to happen.
Although it is nice that on my iPad Pro, let's note the term Pro in it, I can now plug in a USB-C audio hardware, USB-C hard drive, and it just pretty much works. I haven't got to mess about with dongles.
Which is why they did, especially with the iPad Pros, they did that. They did the USB-C change early because it used it. Likewise, the Macs have had USB-C for years because it's a useful thing. It's just that you shouldn't necessarily have it as the main thing for just charging a phone or, and so on. And the problem I got is like, I upgraded my iPhone when the 15 Pro came out, and because it's been a couple of years, so it's like, right, time to upgrade. USB-C, great. Okay, I can plug it into my Mac, no problem, and charge it. I've got a USB-C charger, not a problem. I go into my car to go shopping. Oh, it's USB-A. I need to get another lead, more e-waste, because that Lightning lead that's in my car is now e-waste, effectively. And I keep it in there in case anyone with an older phone comes along to plug into my car. But it's this thing of it's not really doing what they planned it, they wanted it to, they claim it does. It's not reducing e-waste in any form. Because if you buy a cheap and rubbish charger, it's still a cheap and rubbish charger that's going to go in the bin in a year's time or set fire to something.
It's a very political decision, isn't it? They haven't thought of any second-order consequences of what
it's
they've
very
done.
Obviously a lobbying thing from people who make cheap stuff. They want everybody to use, just to buy cheap chargers and not have to buy a Lightning lead or buy a phone that uses a Lightning lead.
Yeah, I mean, that said, I'm about to swap my iPhone 12 for a 15, and I will be very happy to be able to plug to take the USB-C charger from the iPad that's sat on the desk and put it into the iPhone that's also going to be sat on the desk, and I will not have to have the lightnings lying around anymore. So for me, it's great because I've got millions of these things anyway. So I can actually get rid of one and put it in the box of leads to be kept for 30 years.
Yeah. I still have my 30-pin ones just in case.
Oh,
you never know. You never know.
I've still got my iPad too.
So you should.
Wall mounted. And it just streams.
You have to be careful with on that. I likewise have iPads and iPods going way back to when I first started developing for iOS. And every now and again, you do have to inventory and check your batteries and stuff like that. Make sure that they're not bulging.
Yeah.
I had an iPhone 6, which was my UK phone, in that it had a UK SIM in it. So every now and again, I could verify with my bank that it was me and stuff, because they still have my UK phone number. So that phone is an old one that's been, I think I had it many years ago, and it got passed down through the family and then back to me when it was no longer being used. Because that's the thing with iPhones, you use it, and then the one, when you upgrade, the old one gets passed to some other member of the family to use, and it kind of goes all the way around through family and friends. It gets used for years. And this iPhone 6 came back to me, and it's like, well, okay, that'll do as just literally put my old UK SIM in it, use that for validation, that's it. But the battery on it was dead, or nearly dead. So I just left it constantly on charge, which is a bad thing. And it sat there on my desk for about 2 years. And I've noticed a couple of months ago, that's thicker than it used to be. And the top had popped off. And the battery had bulged. And it's like, very carefully remove it and safely dispose of the battery,
Wow.
Yeah. Shame,
and this is the thing, if you've got all these things in drawers, 99.9% of the time they'll be fine, especially if they're not being charged. But there was an influencer who kind of gets all the new phones given to him as freebies, and he reviews them and all this kind of stuff. And he has this wonderful library of every single Android phone and stuff like this, and all these special editions. And he noticed the latest Samsung one, this Samsung special edition thing, had bulged, and he'd only had it a year. And it started bulging. He said, "Oh, that's not good." So he went back through his library, and several of them had already bulged and split the cases. And that's scary, because it's bad enough with a phone, because the potential if that battery blows, that's a serious fire. But this is where that whole problem with the e-bike batteries and stuff, again, the knockoffs, and it goes back to the whole, next year we're supposed to have every battery is supposed to be replaceable, which means we're going to have cheap knockoff batteries in a lot more phones than there should be. And those cheap knockoff batteries are the ones that explode.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, might be less e-waste, but I suspect there'll be more.
Well, based on that subject, you might guess what was my first actual owned Android phone, given the conversation we've just had.
Samsung, presumably.
A Samsung Galaxy Note 7.
No, the exploder phone.
So I didn't get the first batch because it was already recalled.
Flight,
yeah. And of course, all the big ads at airports, if you've got a Note 7 and all the rest of it. So then I got in the second batch, and I was like really excited because I thought this phone looks amazing. And it was. I had it for 2 weeks, and it was a wonderful 2 weeks of all the Android phones. It was like the most beautiful thing. And certainly back then, it just felt so modern and so different to the iPhone because of the stylus and everything. It was just great. And then that was recalled 2 weeks later, and I had to give it up. But of course, everyone had to give it up. And I thought, maybe they'll have a third go. No, that was it. After two goes.
That was tainted.
That was it. Yeah. But it was quite hilarious thinking back at it, how it said they could identify the batch of, was it the first batch or the newer batch? They changed the battery charger colour. So then for people at airports, they'd have to look at the battery icon on the phone and things like that to know if that was the newer one or not. How bizarre.
It was a design flaw. It was very classic kind of Samsung design flaw. We're copying, making everything as thin as possible, but not building in tolerance for what if the battery isn't manufactured absolutely perfectly.
And it looks like the battery fault was actually two very separate battery faults. It wasn't the same one that came for batch 2. It was like this was a completely different battery fault. So my goodness, what a mess. But they survived it somehow, and they're doing very well in the Android space. And if you're not buying one of Google's own phones as like the reference point,
Again,
then
it's
Samsung's right up there.
Spend $1 million to make $1 million and one advertising thing there. It's like my local bank here in Spain doesn't do much in the way of actual banking. They sell stuff. They have their own shop, which is mostly Samsung products, because they get them at very, very low cost and then sell them at full price, but with 0% interest. So it becomes an easy way to get not a cheap phone, but a cheap per month phone that you're not paying any interest on. But they also give them away as promos, or they technically sell them, but effectively giveaways when you take loans out. So some years ago, I got a loan from my bank to do my kitchen up, and they said, "Oh, you can have the loan at this price with this high interest rate, or if you buy a flat screen Samsung TV offers at full RRP, which no one ever buys a flat screen Samsung at full RRP, but 0% interest, your loan and the TV together will be cheaper than just the loan on its own, because it's a promo deal with Samsung." So I said, well, I don't want a Samsung TV. You know, they're fire risks because their power sockets are very badly designed.
My God, I'm going to have to put a note on the bottom of this podcast. You've both said things where I might hear from a lawyer.
This is the last one, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I had a Samsung TV before, and the power socket wasn't fixed to the chassis. It was only soldered to the motherboard. Anytime you unplug it and plug it back in again, it weakens the soldering point, and eventually the thing starts arcing.
These are the personal opinions of their relative speakers, and not the opinion of Pixel Refresh or Associated Game and Gadget Podcast. Thank you.
But yeah, I didn't particularly want one, especially at the price of it for what was, it was an okay TV, but not at that price, But it worked out that if I got that TV with the loan and then gave it away, I'd pay less money. So I did, and I gave it to my mum to use, with a fire extinguisher. And I mean, to be fair, she is happily using it, and it worked great. It was better than the one she had. But apparently the year before, the bank had been giving out Samsung phones on a similar, smaller deal, and teenagers getting loans to get their first car would do this deal to get a phone. And there were so many Samsung phones on the market now given away with these loans. You couldn't sell one secondhand because they'd flooded the market.
Explains all those fires you have as well.
Yeah. I suspect that's more to do with dry brush than dodgy phones, but yeah, it wouldn't be too surprising.
Yeah. Put the two together.
Yeah.
Well, let's finish on a high note, if we can.
A less libelous note.
Yeah, a less libelous note. My computer obsession in retro has gone an extra step, and now I've also got a Commodore 64, which is hilarious because I had one back in the day. And Aaron, you'll remember from a previous podcast, I was lamenting and saying how much I regret getting rid of certain computers and blah, 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 blah. The Commodore 64 was one of those computers I lament letting go. So it was lovely to get another one for a fair price, but it's in a bit of a state. Now, thankfully, I've restored the case, and except for a little yellow tinge on the side, it looks fantastic. I'm amazed how well it's come up. When it arrived, I thought, is there a computer under all this filth and muck and grime? But amazingly, that muck and grime seemingly has actually protected it, because it looks like it's been stored in for a long time. But then when I looked inside and opened it up, there's a bit of corrosion in there. There's rust. So if I get this thing to work, which, by the way, I've not turned on yet with this power supply that came with it, because I don't trust the power supply. So
I'd recap everything first.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of steps to even try powering it on. But, even as a piece of, this is a beautiful computer to look at, it's doing that already. But I do want to go the extra mile and get it all working again. Or plan B, If the innards are not salvageable and it's only for spares, then maybe I'll get another C64 in better condition later on. But you can put a Raspberry Pi inside the Commodore 64, get a nice adapter, and you can still use the same keyboard, the same joystick ports, and away you go. So that's a nice little plan B for it as well.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I really wanted the Commodore 64. It was years before we actually got our own computer, and it ended up being an Apple II client. But my friends had pets, and one of my friends was very rich, had a Commodore 64, and but the build quality and the style of the build on them was just a very nice computer to use, as a home computer.
I'd like to. I mean, I'm looking. I have an eBay search open for a 64. I'll buy one at some point. Actually, I do actually have one. I found it recently. One of the newer ones, but I'd like the classic bread bin one as well. But yeah, I'd love to write a little game for it. Then I can say I've written a Commodore 64 game.
Oh,
and get interviewed in Freeze magazine.
By the time it takes you to release that one, hopefully I'll have time to repair mine. So
it's not going to be anytime soon, given the list of things I want to do. But yeah.
Well, mine's a C64C, and that's the one I had back in the day, so that was the one I went for. I mean, the bread bin one's really nice, but there's just something about the C64C. That's more like a serious computer somehow. It's just the design.
That's the flat. That's the one I was talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
The white one, the flat sort of white one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I do. That's the one I've got. Although I don't think I've got any cables or anything for it, so I've not tested it. But it looks all right. The one I've got. It's been in a box for donkey's years.
Did they put more memory in it for the C?
No.
So it's basically just a reboxed C64.
Yes.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a weird thing at the time.
Yeah.
With Moore's law and everything, for the last couple of decades, we've been used to every year everything is faster and faster. Back then, we had probably nearly almost a decade of everything basically being the same speed.
Pretty much. I mean, a lot use the same CPUs. If we look at the sort of the Amiga Atari side, it was only the custom processors that made them go like the Amiga had an advantage over the Atari because of its custom extra chips. But essentially, the CPU itself, it was the same CPU, just clocked differently.
Yeah, I think that helped though with the games and the design and marketing of the games, because you weren't chasing a moving target with the spec of your game. It has to work on an Amiga 500 or it has to work on an Atari ST 520. That's the spec that you have to make it work on, and everything else was designed around that. So,
but then porting must have been fun between the two.
Oh yeah. But that was one of these things I didn't worry about. I just worked on one or the other usually, and that was it.
It's why those games got so refined, because you had a static spec, and you could. I mean, especially on the 64, the tricks they got up to with the chips were amazing. But you couldn't have done that if there was a more fluid hardware base. But it all went wrong with the PC, didn't it? Really.
I mean, again, the 64 because it was had more than a couple of years as the same spec, people could learn what you could do with it and really dig in and do clever things. So the games got better and better and better on the same spec. Yeah. And then, like I say, PC came along, and then it's just like, throw more memory at it.
Yeah, a different graphic card, different sound card. And here's the next Pentium, here's the next. Then it was a nightmare. Actually, Amiga though. Yeah. Amiga was pretty tweaky because there was the two chip sets, wasn't there? And then the two, they're actually quite different. So we had a lot of problems with our Amiga stuff, making it work on both. So that was the start, I guess. That foreshadowed the later PC nightmares.
Now, when you say both for the Amiga, do you mean as in the same sort of A500 range, or was it when like the more advanced AGS graphics came along?
Well, there was the whatever it was, AGA, and the other one.
Yeah,
there was like the memory was different, which caused us a lot of problems.
I see. So, sort of, you got the A500, A600 era, and then there was the A1200, which had the AGS.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to write another Amiga game, but I think you pick the top spec, don't you, these days, and say that's the one.
No. I was arguing about this in the last podcast. The A500, more people have the A500 than any of the other ones.
Well, I'm not sure I believe this. I think people have got
I've got two.
Everything's
There you go.
virtual. Everything's virtual these days. You just pick the best spec, surely.
I just
No.
get all my 10 liners working. I've got a disc with 67 10 liner games on it for the Amiga that are all fully playable games. But again, I haven't looked at it in 20 odd years, so whether the disc even works, and assuming I actually find the thing, because a lot of my discs have been already stashed away. You know, it's one of the things. A lot of stuff is just that's it. It's lost to history. You know,
It should work though if you find them.
Yeah. Amiga.
My Amstrad CPC 3-inch discs all worked. You know,
Wow.
I had
amazing.
to fix the floppy disk drive on the machine. I had to get a kit. It was £4.95, I think, for a kit to fix and I actually did it and put a new band on it, and it worked, and it fixed the drive. And then I thought, well, that's all well and good, but is it really going to read these discs that have been sat in a box since the mid 80s? And they all worked, every single one of them. Yeah,
that's impressive.
3-inch discs, Maxell for the win.
I'm not sure we'll be saying that about CDs in a few more years' time.
No,
Apparently not. Yeah,
because disc rot. Gosh.
Yeah, I know at least some. I have gone back and pulled out old backup CDs and stuff to just re-archive them to hard disk, and it's like, no, not readable.
yeah.
I've got quite
didn't work.
I've got quite an extensive HD DVD video library, and quite a lot have already suffered disc rot, and they're not that old. I mean, what was that, 2007?
Yeah, and it's different tolerances of drives as well, because of course when you had the original sort of single speed burners and double speed burners and stuff like that, they were marginal on whether you could get enough data to them to make them work, let alone reliably. And then it got up to like 52 times speed readers and stuff like that, which is now, if you've got a USB CD reader, or it'll be a DVD and CD reader, the probability is it's a combined burner reader and everything that's at super speed, and the probability of it reading one of those old single speed burn discs is
Well, I remember getting a 52 speed reader CD-ROM, and I thought, this is such a good idea. This will load games so quickly, but it was so loud.
Yeah,
It was like, well, this was a bad idea, because most people would have, particularly back then, you'd have either a flat desktop PC with a monitor on top of it, so there was no escape in the CD-ROM drive. It was right in front of your face. Or you'd have the tower. Now, if you had the tower, which is more equivalent to what you have nowadays, you'd probably put it under, won't be quite as bad. But if you had a desktop, guess what, folks? I had a desktop one. Oh my word, when I put a 52 times speed in it, it was awful. Instant regret.
Yeah, and if you've got a disc with disc rot on it and it becomes unbalanced, then it's like it's whizzing around so fast. That thing's basically gonna, if it disintegrates, it's going to be loud.
I did think one day I'm going to press the eject button, it's just going to fly off across the room.
Mythbusters actually tested the whole thing of if a CD fails in one of these high-speed readers, will it fly out with shrapnel fly? It didn't, apparently, until they fitted a power drill underneath it to make it go even faster. And then the case was all buckled and everything. It was quite funny.
You've seen that video on the internet of some lads put a washing machine outside and then put a breeze block in it.
Yeah, mine's doing that at the moment with just towels. So I'm kind of, I might have to get that fixed.
And that's the point where we end the podcast. That's the line.
Yeah.
So, Aaron, I hope you get your washing machine sorted out. Tony, welcome to getting a new iPhone 15 at some point in the near future.
Yes.
So we'll get your report on that soon, going from the iPhone 12.
Exciting.
I will see Tony in person for the first time at this event. I'm very much looking forward to shaking your hand and saying how much I love Breton Soul, because I've never spoken to that about you before, ever. Maybe quite a lot, actually. But I hope you enjoyed the podcast, folks, and we will see you next time at the Game and Gadget Podcast.